Hey, hey, folks, this is Book Talk with Corbin coming to you live early this morning because a lot is on my mind. There are two things I just wanted to talk about. First of all, I want to talk about very quickly about some books I'm going to put out there and I'm going to put out a review about. And there are books that focus on people who have overcome tremendous odds to get far in life. And it's also books about people who have experienced a horrific tragedy in their life, but they turn that tragedy to triumph. We need more stories like that published and distributed. We need more stories about folks who have overcome tremendous odds to achieve great things. And one book that really exemplifies that is the Up From Slavery, Booker T. Washington's autobiography. The guy was born a slave. He was born a slave. He was a slave all throughout his most formative years in life. You know, when he was a young kid, little boy. He later founded, as most of you know, Tuskegee University, an HBCU that still exists to this day. It's an HBCU that it still exists to this day. It's an HBCU that has for decades been producing college graduates left and right, year after year, year after year. And it was founded by a former slave, and that former slave was the president. He was the main fundraiser, and he hired many black folk to teach at that university. As a matter of fact, this is sort of quietly kept, but W.E. Du Bois, the great Mr. Critical W. Du Bois, he applied 2-3 times to Tuskegee asking for a job, and each time he requested a job, Booker T said yes. You know, we'd love to hire you. This was despite the fact W. Du Bois publicly was ridiculing and criticizing Booker T. Washington. Folks, there's a difference between being a job taker and a job maker. Booker T. Washington was a job maker. His book, Up From Slavery, autobiography, is very inspiring. It shows you, hey, it can be done. You have those obstacles in front of you. Some of those obstacles seem insurmountable, but you keep on moving forward, and it can be done. Those obstacles can be overcome, and success can be yours. Here's the other thing I want to quickly talk about. From tragedy to triumph. Can I begin to tell you the number of people I personally know, who've experienced horrific personal tragedies. I know one guy where his son was murdered, flat out murdered, and it took the police, the detectives, years and years to finally find the person who murdered this man's son. I know of a woman who her son committed suicide at a young age. He was in his 20s. He committed suicide. Okay? And there are many other stories I could share with you. But in those situations and other situations I can recount to you, those people took their tragedies and turned it into triumph. That man whose son was murdered today has a foundation established in his son's name that gives scholarships out to young people. Tragedy to triumph. That woman I told you about who had her son committed suicide in his 20s, she is a faithful worker in her church. And whenever you remember that church and you needed something, you needed some charity, you need some assistance, you go to her. And she would do everything. She would go to the pastor and she'd do everything she could do to have the church help you. And She would always be quick to give you prayer, and sometimes just come over your house or meet you somewhere for lunch, just to hold your hand and offer her shoulder, as comfort. Hey, baby, you want to cry on my shoulder? Here it is. And yet, she was living with the pain of having lost her son to suicide. Tragedy, the triumph. And the one book I'm going to put up there around that is Helen Keller. Helen Keller's autobiography. I want to go through it first, and then talk to you guys more about it. But that was a tragic situation with Helen Keller. And then what happened? Her family just didn't give up on her. They didn't act like they didn't make some stupid statements like Lizzo or Stevie Nicks talking about, well, let's kill the baby. No. Family said, hey, we got to do what we can do, and thank God they found Ann Sullivan. And so, boom, what are we talking about? Tragedy, the triumph. Tragedy, the triumph. Here's the other thing I want to say real quick, too. Well, let me say a little bit more about moving from tragedy to triumph. Many of you listening right now, you probably had some really, really horrific tragedy, personal tragedy that's happened to you. Hey, turn it into a triumph. Turn it into a triumph. It can be done. I know it's difficult. I know it's hard. I know it's probably unimaginable to you, but it can be done. And you just got to find out your way, your special way to make it happen, But please make it happen, because we need that. We need you. We need that. We, society, we need that. We, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, we, the city of Louisville, we need that. Turn your tragedy to triumph, please. Here's the other thing I wanted to say. You know what? I'm gonna end it there, because I don't want to mix these two subjects together. But maybe somebody out there who's going through something horrific. Maybe their mother or father died killed by a drunk driver, or maybe of some young person who died early. Just died in their teens or their 20s, or even their 30s or 40s because of sickle cell. Or maybe somebody whose son or daughter was murdered. Okay, hey, just encourage them, pray for them, maybe share this podcast with them. Please, just say to them, please do your best based on your time schedule and what fits you to turn that tragedy into triumph.